Well, I think I am live. Hey everyone, it's Lisa K here. I have started a live stream and I am broadcasting to Facebook and YouTube. This is December. Can you believe it? We're in the last month of the year. Today is December 2nd, 2023. What a beautiful day. Wow, what has this year been like for you? Has it gone fast? Has it gone too slow? Has it been just right? At any rate, we are here. Um, I want to talk about Heir Property today. That's one of the things that's kind of on my mind. Um, and it's an issue. It's an issue. So we're definitely gonna get into it. I'm gonna talk about what Heir Property is, which is really refers to land or real estate that is owned or inherited by multiple heirs. They don't even have to know each other. It's just a bunch of people holding some ownership interest in property, land or real estate, without any clear specification as to how the land will be managed, who does what. I mean, it can just create a whole host of property owning uh, real estate like that. So we want to talk about some of those issues because it's caused quite honestly, it's caused a loss of generational wealth with folks. It really has. Just losing property because it's not really managed well. But I want to start by talking about a story that was in the news not too long ago. It had to do with Tyler Perry. I think you guys will remember there was a lady uh, that was basically fighting a big development company, and Tyler Perry stepped in to help. So it's actually a very awesome story, and I want to share this with you. So give me just a moment to get my share up here. Hold on. Yeah, I go through this a lot. But y'all just be patient. Here we go. I hope you can. I hope you can see that. So here's the story I'm going to share. All right. So we're going to stop sharing that. That is now that's beautiful. That's what I'm talking about. That's what we need more of. And it's a beautiful thing that Tyler Perry has stepped in to help this elderly lady who has been fighting land developers who've been trying to take her land away from her. And he stepped in to help. And now she's going to get a 5-bedroom home. So what does that show you? It's very important to stand up and fight for your ownership interest in land, your property, even against the big guys, even against, when you think about David and Goliath going up against huge developers who have all the money, all the lawyers, seems like everybody's on their side. Uh, and then you have this lady who has decided to go against them and stand up to them. Amazing and beautiful, right? So I think that's a very awesome thing, and I wanted to share that with you. So hooray to Tyler Perry for standing up to help some folks out. So let's talk about Heir Property. Again, I'm going to give you the typical situation how I see it. Um, On the law side, this is how I see it. Folks inherit property maybe through a probate court action, and they realize that they've come into the ownership of some land, maybe because someone included you in their will, and so you're now an owner of land. And let's say you might live in New York, and you might now own some land in I like to say, East Jesus, Alabama, somewhere you don't really know about, you've never really been there, but now you're a landowner, and you realize that you own this land with about let's be conservative, maybe about 13 other people. Yeah, this is how this goes sometimes with Heir Property. So, and these other folks, let's say they might be distant cousins, relatives. You may not know them very well, but you end up owning land with them. And so the question becomes, now that you have this interest, how do you deal with this? How do you manage it? Who is going to cut grass and take care of the property? Who's going to, do all the things that's necessary to be a good landowner or property owner? Um, so those issues happen. And then you find that some people, they just own it, and they're not going to do very much. They're not going to contribute to upkeep and maintenance. They're not going to pay the taxes. They're not going to take care of any code violations. They're just going to be owners and kind of ride the waves of that. And then you have others who step up and kind of do everything. And so there are issues sometimes when land is owned like that, even if all the folks are related. And what happens a lot of times, somebody gets tired and say, I'm tired of owning land like this. These folks aren't contributing. They're not doing anything. Somebody might encumber a portion of the land based on their percentage of ownership. All kind of things could happen, and you don't want to be in those situations. So what do? Sometimes you might decide you want to sell your interest and just get rid of it, and not be bothered with Heir Property. And if you sell your interest to, say, it's not someone in the family, but some outsider, like a developer, or, someone who has a lot more money than the other folks owning this property. So you sell it to them, and then they decide, like, hey, I want to force a sell. If you guys can't buy me out, buy my interest out, I'm selling my interest now. I know I just bought this, yeah, but now I'm going to sell my interest because I'm here to make money. So if you can't buy me out at the amount I want, I'm just going to go ahead and sell my interest, and force a sell through a partition action in court. So you then are in court and dealing with judges, and judges deciding whether or not there is going to be a forced sale, because all the folks owning the property may not want to sell. Maybe just this one investor who acquired an interest might be the only one that wants to sell. So now you're in court, and if the court grants that action, partition action, which is an action to basically force the sale of real property, then everybody loses that property. Yes, if it's sold, everybody gets a little piece of money based on the interest that they have in the property, the percentage of interest. So folks make a little money, but at the end of the day, nobody owns that real estate anymore. And so instead of real estate being acquired and held and owned for generations to come, that's not happening in a lot of communities. And it has this concept of Heir Property gone bad, if you will, has really hit the Black community very hard historically in this country. Um, so there are clear challenges with Heir Property. Uh, some of the, I'm going to name about 5 different problems that can happen with Heir Property. Number one, there can be a lack of clear ownership as to who owns the property. A lot of times what happens, you may start off, let's say in this next scenario, let's say 5 people own the property and one of those persons dies, and the way the deed is structured is that the one who died, the survivors of that person now own the interest, or they inherit that real estate interest. So if things like that happen, you may not know exactly who all the owners are of the property. So that's why in number one of the problems is a lack of clear ownership. Number two, fragmentation. As the property is passed down through generations, again, you get increasingly fragmented, numerous heirs, folks you don't know, you probably never met. You're owning property with people that you may not have anything in common with. Um, they may have no management skills. They may not be doing anything to assist with developing the property and keeping it maintained efficiently. And if folks aren't doing their part, what happens to the property? Generally, there is going to be a reduction or reduced overall value to that property if it's not maintained well. Number three, maintenance challenges. Yes, a property has to be maintained, even if it's a property that's vacant land. It still has to be maintained, right? You still may have to cut the grass, keep the grass mowed. If you have shrubbery, bushes, trees, things like that, they may still have to be maintained on that property. There may be easements and things like that on that property that have to be dealt with and maintained. So, owning property can be challenging, and maintaining property can be challenging with repairs, improvements. And if you have folks that disagree with one another, and folks can't get on the same page, what happens? That leads to neglect because folks run to their corners, nothing gets done, and then neglect to the property sets in, deterioration sets in, and ultimately an overall decline in the value of that asset. It goes down in value because folks are not maintaining the property. Number four, legal complications. Oh, yeah. Can't forget about legal complications that can happen when you own heir property. What's one of the biggest ones? How about that partition lawsuit? Yep. Somebody gets tired of owning the property with the rest of the heirs, and they decide, you know what? I'm out of here. I'm going to go ahead and file this action to force a sale, and nobody's going to end up owning this property. We're all going to get paid a little bit, but I'm out of here. And again, it's hard to leave. It's hard to leave a legacy to generations to come when that property is sold along the way. So partition suits are legal matters that can force a sale against the wishes of some of the owners. There could be other types of disputes, which are time consuming. Lawyers might be involved. There could be liens on the property that are not resolved. Sometimes liens and code violations can lead to a forced sale by a municipality against the property. Unpaid taxes on a property can lead to a forced sale of that property. So if folks aren't maintaining taxes every year, that's a problem, which threatens ownership. Number five, limited access to financing. When you go to a bank and a bank sees that there are, 5, 10, 15 people that own that property, and say you want to get a loan for some home improvements, or some, you might want to build something on that land, you're probably going to run into some issues right there. Because once again, you're going to spend a lot of time trying to identify who are the clear owners. If you're financing or doing something like that, then the owners all have to sign off on that. So running around, finding out who all the owners are, trying to get the ones who just refuse to cooperate, that's a job in and of itself. So those type of things can hinder the property's potential for economic development. If you have a big deal and it could really mean that everybody could benefit, but some folks just don't understand and don't realize and won't cooperate, that's a problem. So, have I convinced you that there are a lot of issues with Heir Property? I certainly hope so, because there are. And there are other issues that happen, but I just wanted to concentrate today on 5 key issues or problems that happen with Heir Property. And just to go over that list once again: lack of clear ownership, fragmentation, maintenance challenges, legal complications, and limited access to funding. Those are some of the problems that you have with Heir Property. Now, let me flip the script a little bit and talk about how to avoid Heir Property. How do you just like not deal with this? What if you just inherit it? Somebody puts you in their will. That's one way you end up with this situation. Another way is when someone doesn't have a will. Let's say you are the next of kin. They didn't have a will. Maybe they didn't have any children, the person that passed away. Maybe they only had nieces and nephews, and you happen to be one of those people, a niece or nephew. And so, just by default, according to the state statute of descent and distribution, how property is passed when someone doesn't have a will, you end up owning real estate. Bingo. How about that? That's another way you can come into ownership of Heir Property. Real easy, right? Don't you just wish property would just like fall out the sky and just fall into your hands like that? That's great. But it doesn't always turn out that way with Heir Property. It isn't always great. That's why we're having this conversation. So if you end up in a situation like that, what I would suggest ethically, before you turn to Joe Blow investor, or the big guys who are trying to take all the real estate in the neighborhood to build some big mega mall, before you turn to those guys, why don't you turn to the ones who already own the property? Why don't you offer them your interest, sell it to them before you consider going outside? To me, that's just the ethical thing to do, because think about the person that passed away. They were giving the property, or even by default, the property is going to folks in the family, right? To kinship, to your heirs, to your bloodline. So that is the natural flow. And so I would say I would at least strive to do it that way. Now, if you're dealing with a bunch of ignorant folks, folks that don't really understand real estate, don't know the first thing about owning property, and maybe have lived in apartments and have been renters all their lives, and don't understand the first thing about paying taxes, and especially on time. Okay, if you're dealing with folks like that and you can't really convince them to buy your interest out, that might be the time when you do turn to outsiders to sell your interest. And again, we know what's going to happen when that happens, and an outsider ends up owning that interest. A lot of times, they're not going to want to be involved with the kinship and the heirs and the folks. They're just going to want to force a sale and get paid, because they're investors a lot of times. So that's what happens. I think, you know, we have to, generations of folks have to get smarter and more educated about owning real estate. Even if you don't own real estate, we have to learn about the do's and don'ts of owning real estate, because you can see just from my scenarios here how easy it can be to fall into ownership, right? And you got to know what to do. And you certainly don't want generations to come to lose real estate, to lose ownership interest in land and buildings simply because they didn't understand that they had to pay taxes every year. They didn't know that. They didn't get it. Oh my God. Not realizing that you can own a house outright. It could be paid for. Every dime paid for, mortgage burnt over. But if you don't pay those taxes every year, you must realize, and those of you who own real estate do, that you can lose that property still for unpaid taxes. Yes, the county can take your property for unpaid taxes through tax liens. And if someone else ends up paying off your property taxes and forcing your property to sell, you can lose it right from under you just for nothing more than unpaid property taxes. You see, it's we got to teach our young folks this. I know of a situation where this actually has happened. And I'm going to share this with you. It's a little bit sad, but I'm going to share this with you before I get off here for the day. But this is the situation. There was a man and a woman that owned real estate, long time ago. They were owning this real estate in the 60s and the 70s. They acquired property, and you know how hard it was for especially people of color to acquire property because banks have discriminated historically against Black people. So it wasn't easy at all, if possible at all, to get loans from the banks. Very difficult. Somehow these folks ended up, they owned the property. Good for them. The wife got ill. She passed away. The husband got ill. He passed away, but they had grandchildren, right? They had a lot of grandchildren, maybe children and grandchildren. But at any rate, they had heirs. And so when they passed, no one was living in the house but the couple at the time. But when they passed, some of the other heirs took over the property, physically moved in, but they forgot that, or they didn't know that they had to pay taxes, or one or more of them depended on the other folks who were more responsible to get it done. So there were some that just lived there. They didn't take care of the property. They didn't maintain upkeep. They didn't plant flowers like grandma and grandpa used to do. They didn't keep the bushes trimmed like grandpa and grandma used to do. They didn't, take care of the chip paint. You get it. They didn't do any of those things. And they didn't pay the annual property taxes. There was a neighbor who had been keeping an eye on this property. They wanted this property. So the neighbor gets in touch with one of the heirs, the younger heirs, and said, "Hey, I'd really like to buy this house from you all. Are you interested in selling?" And so an offer was made, and the young man relayed it to the rest of the family members and said, "Someone wants to buy this property." Um, but they didn't own it. They hadn't been to probate court. The property was owned by the estate of the one of their grandparents, and so they didn't have the money to go to court to get the estate probated. And what I mean by that is to get the title legally transferred over from the deceased grandparent to the heir's name. They didn't even have the money to do that. So the property was never in their name, and they couldn't legally sell it because of that. They needed to go to probate court first. So this person who wanted to buy the property was aware of this. They looked in the public record. They could see that the property had not been transferred from the estate of the deceased to anyone in the family yet. So what happens is it comes time to pay taxes. And the person who wants to buy the property went and paid the unpaid taxes and took out what's called a tax deed on the property. They acquired a tax deed. And that was basically from paying the unpaid taxes. And they were, or a tax lien, they acquired a tax lien, I should say. And so they held on to this tax lien. And after the first year, they check with the designated family member again, like, hey, I'm still interested in purchasing the property. Have you guys hired a lawyer yet? Have you gotten through probate court? Do you own the property yet? Can you legally sell it to me? And the answer was, well, we still trying to work on it. We've been talking to a lawyer and we almost got all the money we need to be able to hire a lawyer to go to court so we can get this all straightened out. Okay. So that's what they tell this interested person who wants to buy. Meantime, this interested person is letting the clock sit. And after 2 years, because the person has acquired a tax lien in this particular county, the county allows you to force the property to a sale, right? You can force the property to a sale after a couple of years when you have a tax lien against it in this county. So that's what happens. They force it to a sale. They've done all the research. They know this property. They end up being the highest bidder at the auction, right? And so they acquire ownership of the property by way of a tax deed. Yes, tax lien turns into a tax deed. A tax deed equals ownership. So that's what happened. Now, person goes back to the family. They know they own the property. They know it's theirs now. They done they did their, I mean, it's not illegal what they did. A little shady, and definitely I don't consider it ethical, just being human, person to person, the way they handled that. I don't like it, but there was nothing illegal about it. So they did that. They go back to the family like, hey, I was just wondering, did you get a lawyer? Did you do anything? Well, nah, we almost got all the money. We just about going, we're about ready to go talk to a lawyer. We're going to sit down and talk to, look, the person owned the property at that point. Eventually, these folks found out that they had to move and leave the property. They no longer owned it, and it was taken from under them. Why? Nobody paid the property taxes. Now, mind you, their grandmother and grandfather worked their fingers to the bone, I'm sure, not only to acquire that property, but to be able to maintain it all of those years for the generations to come. And the folks who they left it to let the property slip through their fingers for unpaid property taxes? Are you kidding me? Okay. So these are the scenarios that happen way too often in this country. It's happened from the West Coast to the East Coast, from the North to the South. And people of color have been affected greatly by this. And we have to educate folks about home ownership, owning real estate, owning property, paying taxes, keeping what you inherit, keeping it and passing it along to the next generation. How about that? You know, I'm in real estate, but I'm not trying to tell everybody to sell everything you own. That's not what I'm trying to do. If you want to sell, I'm here to help you make it easy and make sure you maximize value for your property if you want to sell. But it's not my game to try to go and force anyone to sell anything. I like to see people own and acquire and keep and maintain and create legacies for generations to come. That's what I like to see, especially in Black and brown communities, and mostly in Black communities, because that's what I'm a part of. So these stories, if you can't tell by my voice, these type of stories tick me off. Yes, they do, because they should not be happening. Our ancestors worked their butts off. You know, I've read stories about Black folks acquiring property right after slavery ended and work their butts off on, to own property on land contract basis because the banks were not recognizing our folks as humans, number one. So they couldn't even get bank loans, yet alone be considered human, right? So on land contract basis, knowing they're getting ripped off a lot of times, but they paid for these properties. And then there were times when these landowners, these white landowners, did not cooperate and they wouldn't give the deed over to the owners once the land was paid for. They made them pay for it again, and they made them pay for it. And there were some folks who never got the deed after they paid and paid and paid. So you see, these were the kind of problems that happened that hampered us initially. But we, in our communities of color, we have to play catch up. And we got to do it fast because we got to get on track and we got to get ahead of the curve, right? There are no other groups that are, going to lend support, although, some other groups created a lot of detriment. They're not going to lend support. So we have to educate ourselves and get on track as soon as possible in our communities and realize the importance of home ownership. And, I found out something not too long ago that was kind of mind blowing. I didn't know that, if you buy property FHA, you can have more than one family member go in with you on a loan to buy FHA property. So there could be 2 and 3 and 4 people working to buy property together. Create a plan for home ownership so that people in the family can acquire their homes and own them. All right, I'm going to get off this horse for today. It's been fun. I'm Lisa Kay. You guys know my motto, and that is live life on your own turf, right? Yeah, of course, live life on your own terms, but live life on your own turf. That's the best way. Nobody can put you out. Nobody can raise your rent. Nobody can discriminate against you based on color if you own your own property. So if you need help with that process, feel free to talk to me. I'll be back talking with you guys. I'm going to try to do this more often on Saturdays to come on and share with you. Have a great day. Lisa K. Crawford. If you want to do some property searches here in South Florida, don't hesitate to go to my website, which is lisacrawfordsellshomes.com. Have a great day. Talk with you again soon.